Hello, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of Voices of Jewish Refugees with Dr. Sharon Nazarian. My name is Matthew Nuriel, and I'm the Director of Community Outreach and Engagement with Jemena, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. Dr. Sharon Nazarian is an American social activist, academic, and philanthropist, currently serving as the president of the Y&S Nazarian Family Foundation. She's also the founder of the Y&S Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA and has held significant roles with the Anti-Defamation League, including Senior Vice President for International Affairs. Born in Tehran, Iran, Dr. Nazarian immigrated to the United States with her family during the Islamic Republic Revolution of 1979 in Iran. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and International Relations, as well as a master's degree and a PhD in political science, all from the University of Southern California. Throughout her career, Dr. Nazarian has been deeply involved in combating anti-Semitism and promoting human rights globally. She has testified before U.S. congressional committees on issues related to global white supremacy movements and has represented the ADL in international agreements aimed at protecting marginalized communities. Dr. Nazarian, it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for having me.
Of course. So let's delve right into it. We have a lot to cover today. So my first question to you is, in your view, what are the potential implications of the new Trump administration for the Jewish community in the United States and generally?
So that's a complex question with a complex set of answers. And a reminder for the viewers that, I'm an analyst. I'm a scholar and I'm an academic. I'm a community activist. So I have all those hats on. I'm a philanthropist. And I would say that, President Trump's administration is presenting a complete it's a sea change in a way for the American Jewish community. Those of you who know, historically, American Jews have voted along Democratic Party lines. So that's where our political home in America has been. In the first Trump administration, President Trump positioned his policies and in a way that was very welcoming to many Jews, in a way that both through the Abraham Accords, through the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem, through a recognizing of the Golan Heights, real policies that many pro-Israel Jewish Americans felt seen, recognized for the first time, and felt that there is a real alliance, an alignment between those American Jews with President Trump. On the other hand, I would say there's a lot about the Trump administration. And look, and this administration, I have to also, continue the list of things that so far have been lauded by the American Jewish community, including the ADL that I'm affiliated with. And right now I serve as vice chair of its board. So I went from being a professional to now being a volunteer leader. And so the ADL very much is aligned with how I view things. His executive order on combating anti-Semitism has been important and welcomed. His announcements about non-American citizen students on campus who are promoting and openly supporting Hamas, a terror-recognized organization, was welcomed. And what he has said in terms of support for Israel, again, in the second administration, has been welcomed. I would have to argue, though, that as from my perspective, there's also dangers in that kind of bear hug, both of Jewish issues, of issues around fighting anti-Semitism and Israel, that comes with a cost. When policies are enacted in a way that don't adhere by legal norms, that don't involve due process, that break kind of the norms of the way our legal structure has been formed to do, they are then kind of susceptible to being seen as illegitimate. And that it hurts our people and our causes. So if you do something that's good for us, but you do it in an illegitimate way, that could also come back and haunt us and hurt us. More importantly, I would say, what he has done both in his first administration and so far in the first 3 weeks is a partisanship of our issues that, in my view, hurts us. Our issues, whether it's Jewish safety, security, combating anti-Semitism, a strong Jewish and democratic state of Israel, it is imperative that these issues always be seen as bipartisan, that both political parties of the most important country and the most powerful country in the world, the United States, both political parties support these issues, support the Jewish minority of America, support our bilateral relations with our strongest ally in the Middle East. And the tone that President Trump, both in his first administration and continuing today, has set is that this is a Republican and I would say MAGA agenda, and that in fact the Democratic Party is against these. And I think that is, whether you agree with it or not, doesn't matter. It is just not good for us as American Jews. We always have to keep these issues as bipartisan and supported by both political parties. And I think that is damaging to us as American Jews.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people on either side of the aisle. And I'm always like, well, what is your solution? Would you rather there were none of us within the Republican Party or there were none of us within the Democrat Party? Like, where would that leave us? So I couldn't agree more. You touched on something in your answer, which I would love for you to expand on, and that is that critics argue that Trump's executive order on measures to combat anti-Semitism poses a danger in that it encourages Trump's controversial deportation policies and plans and potentially will deter free political expression of our students. Can you talk about the executive order, what it means, why ADL supports it, and what your views are on this? Should we be in support of it too as a community?
So there's two components. One is the First Amendment component and two is the deportation component. I think the deportation component on the surface it totally makes sense. You know, if you're here as a guest, if you're here on a student visa, which means you're not a citizen, you don't have full rights, and you are openly supporting a terror organization that our government recognizes terrorists, which is Hamas, that kind of makes sense that you shouldn't be welcome here. It's about how you do it. So in this country, we have something called due process. When charges are brought against someone, there is a legal system that has to be adhered to make sure that that action is deemed legitimate and that it stands, our legal rulings. So it's not about the announcement itself, it's about how. And if in the process of doing something that we welcome, which is getting rid of anyone in this country that openly embraces terror groups, if in the process of doing that, we're breaking laws, we're committing kind of that deportation process in a way that is deemed illegal, we're actually hurting the cause. So that's really the more specific and I think intricate part that we cannot lose sight of as a community. In terms of First Amendment, especially on campuses, I mean, all of us have learned so much about that given the last academic year, what happened on university campuses in the US and across the globe. And we've learned about this idea of the First Amendment and what are its limitations. We've all learned that there is no limitless access to free speech on campuses. We've learned that university campuses have rules that limit speech. We've also learned some of the hypocrisies around this notion, where those three presidents of universities came before the congressional committees in the House and said everything depends on the context. We know that speech is limited on university campuses every day along a whole slew of issues. And yet, when it came to anti-Semitism, they weren't willing to give the same protection to Jewish students. So that is what we've all experienced as a Jewish community. That's why we were in such a shock when we saw those administrators and leaders of university campuses kind of cower and not stand up for their own Jewish students. And that was really heartbreaking for so many of us. And I mean, for me as an academic, it was truly a gut-wrenching moment to witness not only those three presidents and others afterwards also not stand up and protect their Jewish students. Now, when we come to issues of using anti-Semitism executive orders or other legislation, we're always going to have those who, both on the free speech side and those who don't necessarily want Jews protected to use that as cover to say this is not legal, this is not allowed, it's actually infringing. But I think we have to be very clear. Those rules have to be, put in practice consistently. When it's not consistent, when not all groups are afforded the same protection, when a president of a university or a civil rights organization that advocates, let's say, for Muslim groups, accuses this kind of protection for Jews and yet wants it and demands it for other groups, that's inconsistent. And that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, it feels like it's, once again, we're stuck in the middle, and we really, really should be paying attention all around, and it's a difficult situation to be in. Do you think ultimately the executive order will quell campus anti-Semitism? Or do you think
what I can tell you, Matthew, even just between last year and this academic year, the number of anti-Semitic incidents, and ADL and other organizations are really kind of, not only it's a very, very data-driven analysis that we have at our fingertips, we see that the number of incidents have gone down. The encampments, the taking over of buildings, all of them, even the demonstrations have gone down in number. That's on the good news side. On the not so great news side is that those incidents that have taken place have been actually in some ways more violent, more worrisome, rather than just, narratives, rhetoric that we're uncomfortable with. So, we saw at George Mason University this academic year, 2 back-to-back incidents within a month. The first being 2 sisters who had, were both students at George Mason, had been previous heads of the Students for Justice in Palestine student club. They had broken law. Their house was then checked by police, and they found all kinds of weapons, Hamas literature. So that was very worrisome. These were students who then led to their arrest because of, what they had done on campus, and then they found weapons in their homes. Less than a month later, I think a couple of weeks later, an Egyptian student at George Mason was also arrested, where he was a freshman, an 18-year-old, where it was found that he had very intricate plans for attacking the Israel embassy in New York. So again, much more violent, much more worrisome. So the cases that we have seen this academic year are a little more violent, a little bit more worrisome, but the numbers have shrunk. So do we give credit all that to Trump administration? I think it's too soon. This administration has been there for 3 weeks. So whatever we're seeing started previous to that. And I think we have to be fair with the Biden administration, give them where credit is due, criticize them where they fell short. And I think we will have to yet to see what happens, the real effects of the executive orders and some of the policy changes that Trump administration is enforcing. Now, there's no question that university presidents and administrators are much more cautious, are much more aware of the issues. I can tell you from, I've spoken to maybe 10 presidents, university presidents in the last 6 months. They're all aware. They all have now built-in infrastructure, staff, special administrators looking at anti-Semitism and Jewish life. So the awareness has really gone up in a positive way. Jewish students feel they have more voice. Jewish faculty, which is kind of, Matthew, I think it's one of the pieces that we've all missed. There hasn't been much talk about how much Jewish faculty have paid a price. Remember, they're working in a profession and a field that is generally anti-Israel. Yeah. And the anti-Zionist nature of it impacts Jewish faculty who, as many Jews, are also pro-Israel as part of their identity. So I think there's still things that have to be improved, but I think the awareness and some of the steps many universities have taken are all signs going in the right direction.
Do you think it's enough? I personally know, I have 2 people that are friends of mine, Dr. Saba Sumek, and this was way prior to October 7th, and then post-October 7th, Shai Davidai, who have paid the ultimate price for being openly Zionist and proudly Jewish as faculty. So I just wonder how effective, how much of it is genuine and how much of it is let's put some policies in place just for optics sake. But I guess we won't really know.
Well, I can tell you that, Title VI and Title VII investigations, civil rights investigations that the Department of Education started under the Biden administration with huge numbers, had an effect. So holding these universities responsible for the way they're protecting their Jewish students, according to civil rights protections that are afforded every student, is important. And that has made a difference. Whatever changes we've seen is not for altruistic reasons. It's not because they love one or don't love the other. It's not about that. It's that these university administrators are being held responsible and liable for all kinds of legal issues. And that has kind of moved the needle. I think the trends we saw break out on October 7th and afterwards were theirs that were all seen ahead of time. I mean, we at ADL saw the changes on university campus and across American cities way in advance, maybe in the last 5 to 7 years in America. And I would say a lot of, democracies across the world had very similar trends. October 7th just kind of exploded, kind of the scale of it, what we saw, not just a massacre in Israel, but what happened in cities in America and across the world. That was just the scale and the normalization, and the reaction was just shocking to all of us.
Absolutely.
So the trends were there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a very challenging moment. And also because, let's be real, a lot of Jews absolutely abhor Trump's policies and recognize what they perceive to be the danger that he poses to our democracy. Where a lot of us are also simultaneously optimistic in his ability to pave a new path towards a more stable and secure Israel and Middle East. How do you reconcile these two things? Is Trump indeed good for Israel?
Again, as a political scientist, and I'm a comparativist, so I'm going to put the Trump administration within a broader context. What we've seen is anytime a political leader, and specifically a populist political leader, that uses the same playbook as other populist play leaders, kind of give a bear hug to Israel. Mm-hmm. And when they're controversial themselves among their own citizens, maybe half the country's voted for them and the other half hasn't. Remember someone like Bolsonaro in Brazil or Viktor Orban in Hungary. I mean, these are very similar populist authoritarian, I would say, with authoritarian tendency kind of leaders that have used very similar kind of messaging, very similar outreach to maybe the poor or the lower socioeconomic classes, offering them all kinds of solutions that sound amazing, but very difficult to enact. This is what populism is kind of built on. Those kind of offerings, and coming back to Israel now, that kind of bear hug. And by the way, all those three leaders I mentioned, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, and President Trump in the US, have all embraced Israel in that way. Mm-hmm. What that does is it makes those people who support them happy and supportive of Israel, but all the other people in those countries and in the broader society or against those people hate Israel. We have to calculate that. We have to calculate that, yes, as much as we love leaders of other countries say, we love Israel, we support Israel, we have to understand why they're saying it. Why is someone like a Viktor Orban saying that? Why are the far-right political parties in Germany today, the AfD, embracing Israel? The reason is because they see Israel as what's called an ethno-national state. They see Israel as something what they want their countries to be, run by one group, what they see as white majority group, controlling everything. Most likely, they see Israel as being anti-Muslim, anti-everybody else, and it's just for those people. So what they want in Germany, what they want in Austria, why they want in Hungary, is also this homogeneous group controlling everything, and the country is only for them, and they hate diversity. But this is not acknowledging the very reality of Israel, which is a multicultural, diverse society that has the mix of not only a variety of Jews like Mizrahim and Ashkenazim and all the other Ethiopians, but also non-Jewish citizens. So even the reason they love Israel is bad for Israel because it doesn't reflect the reality of Israel and what we all uphold as what we love about Israel. So we have to be careful. Who do we get in bed with? Who do we acknowledge as like being on our side when their view of Israel is not the view that we have and we hold and what Israel and Zionism was built on. So these are the complexities that we as citizens, as voters, have to really be aware of. Just hearing someone say, I love Israel, is not where we stop. We have to continue to see what is motivating them. What is their ideology? Are we aligned on values? And most of these people I mentioned, we don't have shared values with them.
So insightful. Thank you for that answer. Moving on a little bit. I'm sorry, I don't want to laugh when I ask this question, but do you think Trump is serious when he says he wants to take over or own Gaza? How do you understand his language around the land of Gaza? Do you think that Trump can contribute to finding a more tenable solution for Palestinians and breaking the status quo in that very troubled little piece of land?
Well, look, I think we're all learning about kind of the Trump style and negotiating strategies that he used in his first administration and now doing it again. We've all learned that, he believes that he's the ultimate negotiator and he's a deal maker. We know that one of his strategies that he thinks works really well is, threatening with the worst possible scenario and then using that as a starting point to then negotiate and kind of get to where he really would like to go. But that's kind of his negotiating style. So when it comes to Gaza, there's certain realities on the ground that are immutable. You have a population there that has been there. They belong to, this land. They're a population that, it's a piece of land that the United States can't just announce and say, okay, now it's ours.
Right.
It's just, I don't know how you do that.
That's the part that makes me giggle.
Exactly. And then telling Jordan and Egypt that you just got to take all these people. That doesn't reflect the reality of, for example, Jordan. Jordan's very precarious position right now. That is, as it is, Jordan has over 50% citizens of Palestinian origin. So the very, very fine balance, demographic balance of Jordan can be turned upside down if more Palestinians go there, if another million go there, it'll turn it upside down. And that's bad for the region. It's bad for Israel. It's important for Israel that both Egypt and Jordan remain stable and don't have tumult, because we have peace deals with both of them. These are borders that are quiet right now. And we're working with those two Arab governments. So there's nothing in the interest of Israel for these two governments to then become, face upheaval and crisis, and for demography to be turned upside down, and for the king of Jordan, who was just in the US, to be ousted. These are very delicate issues. So again, going back to this notion of kind of putting the worst case scenario on the table, threatening, bullying, scaring everybody half to death, and then starting the real negotiation. If that's the case, then what? Are we really looking at kind of coming out of our normal paradigms and thinking, out of the box? Is that the goal here? I'm all in for that, because believe me, we all know we've been stuck in this place for the longest time. The Israel, Palestinian Authority, Gaza dynamic has been stuck. No one's been able to move it. But let's be serious about it. And if his strategy is to threaten things that are not conceivable and to open the door to maybe the leaders from the region, like Saudi Arabia, like UAE in the Gulf, coming up with new solutions that no one had thought of before, bring it on. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas, and clearly we've been stuck. So I'm kind of keeping an open door, knowing what has already been announced is, I think, just not viable, but maybe it'll open the door to fresh new ideas that we haven't thought of, and I'm going to be open to that.
Let's hope so. If they call his bluff, though, that's a whole other conversation.
Well, believe me, those world leaders, can read Trump better than any of us can. It's amazing to me how the Russians, and I've been in those rooms with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and they have such an understanding of not only the psychological makeup of our leaders, but they're much more well-versed about what motivates them and what doesn't. So we have to know that they know as much as we know, at least, and maybe more. And they're very careful about kind of how they engage with this kind of a political leader as Trump is. So they know where the red lines are. They know where the incentives are, what motivates him, and probably, at a cost to us as Americans, because they know how to play him very well, as we've seen Putin do as well.
Right. Well, it all remains to be seen, right? We'll see how this unfolds. I want to shift gears a little bit away from Israel and to Iran. Given your background and your expertise, how do you assess the administration's approach to Iran?
I would assess it as very mixed. I think, first administration, maximum pressure approach meant pulling out of JCPOA, the nuclear agreements that U.S., European leaders, Russia, China had gotten to. And I think that was a very controversial issue. I think that Israel and the world was weakened by pulling out of that negotiation. I do think that having some regime that has oversight, that keeps Iran's hand tied, is better than not having one. And we've seen that since pulling out, the regime has gone full force and ready to get to that threshold, breakup point of having nuclear capabilities. Now, calling maximum pressure policies, enacting them one more time, does mean more sanctions regime, more targeting specifically of financial and other transactions of the regime. Those are good things that every administration should uphold and should keep those pressures on. I think the mistake of the Biden administration was their intent on kind of bringing down the temperature, being conflict averse, gave the wrong message. And this is where we Mizrahim know better, where we Iranians know better, how those kind of messages are understood by the Iranian regime. They see it as weakness. They see it as willingness to keep being dragged along, where there's no deadline here, where there's no end point here. And that worked against us. I really think that was a weak point of the Biden administration. The people in the administration responsible for the Iran portfolio really adhered to this, conflict aversion at any cost. It was a big mistake, I think. And trying to bring them to some sort of a deal essentially misunderstood the DNA of this regime. The regime is all about its own continuation at any price. They don't care about ideology. They don't care about nothing. It's just about their own regime survival. So when you give them the message that we just want to make a deal with you, whatever it takes, they know how to play that game.
Yeah.
I think the Trump rhetoric has definitely put more fear in them, but more importantly, what happened with what Israel did in Lebanon and all of its proxies, that is the real fear. So the credit really goes to the Israeli IDF and the decisions that the Israeli government made in kind of beheading the proxies that the regime had used to inflict all kinds of terror, all kinds of, and by the way, not just in the Middle East, globally.
Yeah.
So I think it's mixed. On one hand, the messaging is the right messaging for this regime. What I worry about is some of the people the administration has brought on to really address Iran portfolio at the Pentagon and other places actually are part of that soft on Iran regime ideology. And one of them specifically is very anti-Israel. So I think the regime is also confused in some ways. They don't really know when they see this mixed messaging. On one hand, saying we're going to be tough on you, we're going to do maximum pressure again, we're going to sanction you, blah, blah. On the other hand, bringing people as part of the administration who are very soft on Iran, they're isolationists, they're anti-engagement militarily with Iran. Those are out there. Then the regime is getting a mixed message. So I think it's not a consistent policy that I'm seeing.
Yeah, Michael Dominio, is that his name?
That's his name. That's the one. In his affiliation with the Quincy Institute, I mean, if you look, he's been very anti-Israel, not supportive of U.S. support for Israel militarily. I mean, he has a real record. Now he's scrubbed all of it, so don't even bother Googling him or looking on X. He scrubbed all of that, which again is a red flag. Why would you scrub your whole social media and history if you can stand by your past positions? So that is a red flag.
Yes, yeah. To me, that's where a big problem comes in with people that are staunchly pro-Trump because of his Israel stance. I would never tell anyone not to be, But we have to keep our eyes open to situations like this. I mean, this is the person he's put, I believe, in charge of Middle East matters, right?
At the Pentagon.
At the Pentagon, and it's very much aligned with the head of NIAC. So we really, really need to be, I always say, like, it's a shame when we put our American political ideals over our Jewishness. We can't do that.
And I would say even Jewishness, because, someone like that can promote policy within this administration that gives the wrong message to the Iranian regime. So even as the Jewish Americans, as by the way, we as Jewish Americans are threatened by that regime here. I mean, not only do we care about what it does to Israel and the Middle East, we've seen that regime comes. I mean, I have bodyguards when I go in certain parts of the world because I don't trust those governments to protect me. So I, as a Jewish American, Iranian American, am threatened by that regime. And we've seen them, try to abduct Masih Ali-Nejad and other anti-regime activists. So none of that is beyond this regime to do. So we have to be very clear about what our government stands toward that regime is, and it has to be consistent.
Absolutely. I've become a little more familiar with it than I'm comfortable with, given the work that I do online as well. It's really actually terrifying. Which does bring me to another question, which is, what impact do you think that these policies have on Iranian Jews, but also, more importantly, the small community of Iranian Jews who remain in Iran?
So, I mean, it is not without cost. I mean, I'll start with Jews of Iran, and Jews of Iran have always been used as human shield by the regime, right? We've seen anytime the temperature goes up between US and Iran, a synagogue gets, has a fire, a cemetery is burned down. I mean, the regime gives very clear messages to its own Jewish community that you're in the line of fire here, and it's not beyond us to hold you as human shields to stop America or Israel from targeting us. So that community has been and will remain kind of as collateral damage for anything that fallout from the policy of the two governments. Number two, what we've seen now with all the full stop of any refugee resettlement from all parts of the world, which the Trump administration has done, like, across the board. And that's the challenge. Everything it is enacted, it is like a big, brushstroke, a big, sledgehammer to things that deserve a nuanced approach, that deserve to be studied carefully to see, are you cutting out all the bad guys or all the good guys and bad guys at the same time? So I can tell you that HIAS, the oldest Jewish refugee organization that has helped bring many Iranian Jews and other minorities to America, after the revolution and since, has a whole pipeline of Jews and other religious minorities who are very vulnerable, ready to be resettled in America, and it's all been put on hold. Stop, full stop. And so that's a disservice. That's a disservice to those who want to leave. That's a disservice to us as American Iranian Jews who want to see our brethren be safe, either resettled in Israel or in America when they want to be. So it is really about the approach. It's about the way things are done. And I think right now, Jews of Iran are paying a price for it, as well as other minorities, Baha'is, Christian converts, who are very vulnerable, LGBTQ, who come to HIAS. And HIAS specifically helps, by the way, LGBTQ from around the world, even from Africa, FSU, where they need to leave and their lives are in danger. All of that has been cut. All of that has been completely stopped. And I think that's a disservice. That is just the wrong approach to a very delicate topic. And cost saving is good. And believe me, we know that government has a lot of fat and things can always be done more efficiently, but not this way. And I think this is a disservice. So I think Jews of Iran are paying that price. And the fact that, when the temperature goes up, their lives are also put on the line. We've seen when Jews are arrested as, spies for Israel, we've seen, time and time again, they are vulnerable.
Yeah.
As Iranian Americans here, we saw in the last election that most Iranian Americans, Jews, voted for President Trump because they heard what they wanted to hear, especially after the heartache and heartbreak of October 7th. Mm-hmm. I think I've kind of made my position clear about where are my, real qualms and concerns about this administration, and where we need to go deeper as Iranian Americans, even though we hear the anti-regime rhetoric from the administration, even though we hear some of the approaches, we have to be savvy and wise about what's really good for our interests. And we have to be at those tables. That's what I also worry about, is that we're not at those tables. We're not engaged civically. We're not understanding how our democracy works. We're not worried enough. And Matthew, me coming on your show today, it started from that conversation you and I had about threats to our democracy, our democratic institutions. Why, as minorities, we have to believe that the stronger our democracy and those pillars of our democratic society that protect us, that's our interest. And if those are weakened, those are threatened, those are attacked, it is bad for us. And we have to understand how our government works. Why is there checks and balances? Why is it that the judiciary and the executive branch and the legislative branch cannot all be kind of in cahoots with one another, that they should have separation of power? These are all built into the protections that we as minorities receive. If the executive, the president does something wrong that's bad for us, the Supreme Court is the ultimate holder of saying, no, we're going to put that check on you because this is illegal according to our constitution. So I think we as communities, Jewish communities, Mizrahim, Iranian Americans, have to really make the investment to educate ourselves about how our government works and to be involved and engaged to protect our interests and not just fall for those kind of, nice to hear slogans, but what actually really they lead to is erosion of our protection, erosion of our rights.
It's interesting because as an Iranian and Jewish activist, and being in both spaces, the demand for Iran is for that to become a democracy. And yet so many of us, Iranians and Jews alike, are kind of closing our eyes to the possible erosion of that. So that's just really interesting. How within the Iranian and Mizrahi communities, how do we do what you're saying we need to do? How do we implement that?
Well, look, we as a community have very clear priorities, and education is been, we Jews have been known for that, and we've always known that investing for our children's education is probably the most important priority. This kind of learning and education should be prioritized just as much as becoming a doctor and a lawyer, because this is all we have, is those protections that this system of governments that we live in, which is a democracy, it's the protection it affords us. If we don't realize when their protections are taken away, when they're eroded, or when they're threatened, we cannot advocate for our own interests.
Yeah.
And that's why, my work at ADL really showed me that. And, some people criticize ADL for saying, why do you advocate for non-Jews? Why do you advocate for other vulnerable communities? Why is that even our business? We should only advocate for Jews. But that is a very short-sighted view. And it doesn't even recognize that we're such a small, as Jewish Americans, we're such a small minority that we can't do that alone, that we need to work hand in hand with other minorities, with other vulnerable groups. And so that kind of coalition work is instrumental, but also understanding that if the protections I just referenced is eroded for one group, it can also erode for us. Right. So right now, this whole obsession with trans issues, real obsession, I view it. If that group is targeted in that way, what would hold, and if we're seeing kind of the white nationalist ideology permeating this administration, where plenty of leaders of this administration have had histories deeply in white nationalist, white supremacist, and adjacent ideologies, and they're targeting the trans and the LGBT community and reproductive rights. Why would it prevent them from attacking Jewish rights and the Jewish community? What would stop them? Because we are as much against their ideology as an LGBT, trans, or some other Muslim is. Yeah. So we can't be short-sighted in the way we look at things. And we can't only think about, as long as it affects me, I'm good, and the rest I don't care about. We're all interconnected. Yeah. And imagine what the Jewish LGBT community is feeling today. Imagine what the Jewish trans community is feeling. I mean,
yeah, I don't need to imagine.
I'm telling your audience,
Yeah.
you know it
Yeah.
better than anyone, and your advocacy, I mean, I have such regard and respect for you.
Thank you.
Because you also pay a price for it, and as we all do. But, you know, the most vulnerable community is where we have to put our attention, actually, because it starts with the most vulnerable, because that's easy to squash. And then it goes to the next and the next and the next.
And I think the trans community is definitely the easiest target for them right now. And when you see the rhetoric online and in person, you see it all the time. And I think as far as, you know, being somebody who's multiple identities, LGBTQ plus, Iranian, Jewish, it's really, really difficult for a lot of LGBT Jews right now. It really is, because, and it's not just us. I mean, it's like for everybody. It's we're seeing President Trump say things that I think a lot of us felt, regardless of if he acts on them or not, I'm not getting to that part, but a lot of us felt should have been said by leaders a long time ago. But on the other hand, this other part, like for me, this other part of my identity, I can't just ignore that. And I'm seeing people that will, and that's their choice. It's what's important to the next person. It might not be important to me, and vice versa. But it's a very, very difficult situation to be in.
I think we're caught between, you know, a rock and a hard place in so many ways, as Jews, as Iranian Americans, as LGBT Americans, and we're put in very difficult binary choices where these are not binary issues.
That's exactly it.
These are complex issues. We have to embrace that complexity. And to say that we're in a post-nuance world, we can't accept that, because these are very delicate matters that have to be understood in a deep level. Absolutely. And we have to understand also that they're interconnected. So we just kind of say, okay, you know what, the trans community, I don't care about them. It doesn't affect me. It actually does, because it doesn't. And as we say, you know, what starts with the Jews, it doesn't end with the Jews. What starts with the trans community doesn't end with the trans community. You can be sure of that.
100%.
I want to say something, but for the members of your audience, that, you know, I've talked about kind of white supremacy, kind of, I want to also be very, very cognizant of the threats and what has happened to Jews in America, across the world. Threats emanating after October 7th from the far left extremist group. Mm-hmm. And so much of my work is focused on that right now. And I can tell you, as an Iranian American, we Mizrahim, we Iranians, have an understanding of this coming together of Islamist ideology with this kind of far left ideology in a way that the Ashkenazi community maybe didn't. Now they're learning. Now they're finding out, what does that mean? Why is it that these two extremist groups have come together? What has been the influence of Islamist extremism in America and across the liberal democratic world? Why is it that the European capitals are facing the kind of challenges they are? Those issues have to be confronted front and center. What, I hate the word woke, but let's, you know, again, everybody understands what it means. What the extremist left has done in disabling any sort of criticism of Islamist extremist hate and calling it Islamophobia in 2 seconds is not only a disservice, it is really kind of a hijacking of any conversation that has to do with hate, anti-Semitism that comes from Muslim Islamist ideology. And we have to address that. And we Mizrahim have a good understanding of that, and we should be speaking up in a way that is not just say, you know, we hate all Muslims, not to say that all Islamist culture is hateful. That doesn't help us. Yeah. But to talk about the roots of extremism in Islamist ideology and how that's permeated our university campuses, of faculty who think they're social justice warriors and yet don't understand that Hamas does not represent the face of the resistance, of decolonization, of anti-imperialism, and they're like completely confused and lack understanding in a way that we do as Mizrahim. So let's be very clear about that side of the equation and kind of the horseshoe effect. This is what's very important for your audience to understand. The far left Islamists and the far right Nazi, neo-Nazi, they all come to the same place. Same hate, same targeting of vulnerable groups, and the same assertion. So this left-right thing doesn't even work anymore. But And I'm asked so often, Matthew, which threat is worse? Is it the right? I'm like, first of all, can we afford to not look at any of those threats?
Right.
All of them are violent threats against our community, and we're targets of them. But also, it doesn't mean that if I'm a Republican, that I'm only going to see what's happening on the left. That doesn't help us. We have to call out what's going on in our own political camps
100%.
and make sure that we just call it out as we see it.
I could not agree more. Amen, amen, amen. Like, this is like what I shout from the rooftops all the time. And the horseshoe theory is real, and you don't need to take our word for it. Just was it in Toronto a few months ago, the protest where we saw and not just that, but we're seeing in a lot of these so-called pro-Palestinian protests, people doing a Nazi salutes, and it just
the image that I use a lot of my public speaking is a home of a Holocaust survivor outside Brussels in Belgium was spray painted with the same pink spray paint, a Hitler swastika, and from the river to the sea written. Like the same person did a swastika and from the river to the sea on a home of a Holocaust survivor. So like that encapsulates everything.
Absolutely. At the root of it, it's really the same ideology, and it's a shame for anybody to feel like they shouldn't call it out because it's coming from a certain part of the world or from a certain color of people. So you touched on this a little bit. Do you think there's a gap in understanding when it comes to anti-Semitism against Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews versus anti-Semitism that targets Ashkenazi Jews? And how should that be addressed? Because I certainly feel like there is a very big lack of understanding. And you said, yes, it's changing now post October 7th. I say it shouldn't have taken October 7th for that change to happen. But also, I personally don't feel like it's still not quite clicking with a lot of organizations or individuals. What is your take on this?
I mean, where I would take the answer to that question is, first of all, we as Mizrahi Jews show our Jewish identity, our sentiment toward Israel, our Zionism in somewhat different way. And again, using broad brush strokes and generalization is probably not a good thing to do. But if I were to generalize, I would say, young Jewish Iranians on campuses today, it was no coincidence that among the student leaders who testified in Congress in the last academic year, a good chunk of them were Iranian Jews. So I think our refugee experience, our understanding of what Israel means to us, our strong Zionism that we were raised with in our homes, you have all of that in the Ashkenazi community as well. But we, again, have a different, not more, not less, not better, not worse, a different sense of our Jewishness, our connection with our Zionism, our connection with what Israel means to us. And so then we also get targeted differently because of that, right? If you look at UCLA Hillel today, you have all Jewish students there, but you have the Iranian Jewish students there, vocal, leaders, confident, sometimes too much. We all remember that one incident on campus, which was not a good step, where violence broke out. And I think we have to be aware of also the limitations of our activism. Where is productive activism? Where it crosses the line into not being productive. I don't know if you read, Matthew, at Beverly Hills High School after Trump won. Did you read this news article?
No.
At Beverly High, which has a very high percentage of Jewish Iranian students, Iranian American students, at some point, a whole bunch of Jewish Iranian students went around the hallways of the high school, kind of shouting Trump, 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 and kind of, I don't know if they had an American flag or not, but really, disrupting the school kind of as a show of support for Trump across the hallways. And again, they're young, they're passionate, I get it, not a productive mechanism for kind of bringing our issues, getting others to care about our issues. That's divisive behavior. That's divisive. That's meant to divide, not to bring us together. So coming back to your question, I think, look, we as Mizrahim, we have an understanding of our Jewishness and our Zionism that should be incorporated and understood and recognized by the legacy Jewish organizations. When I joined ADL's board as an executive, I think I don't know if I haven't done the real study, but I think I was one of the highest positioned Mizrahi women of any legacy Jewish organization. I think I can say that. And that was Jonathan Greenblatt's intention. He understood that we need, when we say, viewpoint diversity, that the Mizrahi perspective has to be brought in to the decision-making and the lenses of some of these organizations, because they lack it. And they have to do a better job. And I don't think we're there yet. And so even in terms of affecting their policy, vis-a-vis different administrations, vis-a-vis our standing on Iran and on Israel, you're missing half the lens here. And I think it's to their detriment. They talk the talk. I don't know how much they've actually walked the walk. And I would say, one Middle Eastern at the head of ADL is just not enough. And I'm no longer even there. So at this point, they don't have anyone with a Mizrahi background. But we have to also step up. We have to be in positions to take on such leadership roles. And that kind of speaks to to that civic engagement, having that diverse world experiences that makes you, be someone that they could recruit. We have to, also proactively take those steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud to work with Jimena, for Jimena.
Jimena has been amazing and unique in that way, and its emphasis. And that's why I'm such a fan of Jimena, and we've always supported Jimena and everything it's done. I just love the lens it brings on, into all these issues, and helps others also take their lead, because they need to learn from others who are really squarely in kind of a Mizrahi space. And I think they're trying. We're definitely not there yet.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's an uphill battle, but at least we're making headway. I mean, there are times when we literally have to be those pushy Mizrahim and push our way in, but we do it because it's needed. So
Matthew,
listen.
One of the things I'm proud of, if I just may add
Please.
A final note, we as a foundation invested about a decade ago in investment in young Iranian leaders to be brought into the Jewish Federation system of Los Angeles. We did a pilot, we did a whole study on it, and then we started a 5-year plan of how do we engage young Iranians to be brought in to everything the Jewish Federation has to offer, because they knew that they were leaving half the Jewish community of LA outside of their purview. The Iranian, Russian, Israeli communities and these are huge communities, as we all know. So today, just in the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, I'm happy to report that we have young Iranian leaders at every level of their volunteer engagement, professional staff, and that's real progress.
Yeah.
And the board of ADL, the board of the Federation still doesn't have that many Iranians on it, and that's kind of where I'm still pushing. But we need to be around those tables, those conference tables, those decision-making tables. We can't just wait for them to come to us. We also have to volunteer. We have to put ourselves out there. We have to do the time, do the kind of community work that's required to then be put in leadership position. It just doesn't happen overnight. So it takes both sides.
Yeah. And I'm aware of the work your foundation has done in terms of that. And it's been incredible. I think, and then I have 2 more questions because I know we got to wrap up. I think there's a lot of work we need to do internally as well, because, for example, I always use this example. I have a relative who happens to be very wealthy, and his mind is money all the time. And when he said, "What are you doing these days?" I said, "Oh, I just got a job with a nonprofit organization." And I went off on my whole tangent about Jimena. And his only reply was, "Nonprofit?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you get paid?" And I was like, "Of course, yes, it's a job." So there's an understanding that I think we also have to teach from within our community as well, so that they understand what this is and why they need to be involved.
No doubt. And these are the parts of our community. Look, 2029, Matthew, is going to be 50 years that we're living in the diaspora as Iranians. 50 years, half a century we'll be living here in America. So in some parts of our community, in terms of our adaptation, acculturation, integration, we've done beautifully. I mean, and we're deemed such a successful immigrant community. Like, everybody raves about us, and we're so thrilled, and we've earned that, no question. But there's so much of our becoming Americans that's still missing, that's still lacking. And yes, we're all parents, and we want our children to have the kinds of careers that will give them financial independence and success. And yes, I get all of that. But the fact that someone like yourself, as talented as you are, Matthew, and you could be doing anything, you have chosen your professional career and commitment of all your talent to give to the community, to give back through this wonderful nonprofit that represents your identity, your community, and helps the rest of America see us, understand us, acknowledge our needs, recognize who we are. That is tremendous. And to value that is the part of the learning that our community has to do.
Yeah.
So the salary size is one component, but the contribution you're making to our community, the pride you're bringing, that you're there at a major organization representing us, bringing that understanding of who we are as Iranian American Jews. I mean, there's so much value to that. So we have to appreciate that and say, I want my child to be the next Matthew Nuriel. And so that's what the work we still have to do, along with all the other things I mentioned as well. But I think we have to appreciate these kinds of attributes that American society has taught us we haven't completely embraced.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you. That was very, very sweet of you to say, and very touching.
I mean it.
Thank you. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Let's do it. Yes.
Because I want to ask you about the Y&S. You founded the Y&S Nazarian Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA. UCLA is a major institution for academic discourse on Israel. Given the current wave of historical revisionism, erasure of Mizrahi Jews, and narratives that falsely depict Jews as exclusively European usurpers, how do you see this impacting both academic integrity and Jewish identity?
You know, I reached a conclusion kind of to establish a center first on my own before I even brought it to my family. And that came from my own academic work. You know, you mentioned that I did all my studies at USC, and I remember it was palpable to me when campuses shifted in their overall sentiment regarding Israel. I remember it. I felt it. I could see the number of demonstrations that were held. And USC is a private university. In fact, we had a lot of students from the Gulf, you know, a lot of the sheikhs and others would send their kids to be educated there. So it wasn't a public institution like UCLA. But I remember when Israel went from kind of the aftermath of the 6 Day and Yom Kippur War, kind of seen as the weak one, as the one coming, you know, David versus Goliath. And there was so much global, and I would say in the US, and especially in academia, there was real support for Israel. Most academics saw Israel as this kind of amazing, miraculous country that made it through thick and thin. And that narrative changed. I remember that shift. And I remember that was the decision where I said, you know what? I looked around at the university. I'm like, why is there no Israel studies? There were no Israel studies programs. I mean, at that time, there was one. At Brandeis University in outside Boston. It's a Jewish university. Yeah. It's kind of a small liberal arts college. And I'm like, why is that the case? So what I learned is after World War II, there was an explosion in academia on Holocaust studies and Jewish studies. But somehow, I don't know, academia never got around to, just like we understand, you know, Korean studies and Mexico studies and I don't know, any other country in the world, there was no Israel studies centers. There was no systemic and systematic study of contemporary Israel. So I came to that conclusion, and I was lucky enough that I could build it up. And then my family decided to endow it and name it. All along this journey of establishing and building the center, we've had challenges. We had challenges where faculty were anti-Zionist, called this a donor-led thing, and the donors are coming in, and wealthy Jews are coming in. All of that we had to contend with. And to the credit of the UCLA leadership, they understood that this is an important area of study and discourse, and Israel is a normal country like any other country. What was challenging was that we couldn't put the center in the Center for Near East Studies, where geographically Israel should be studied, because it was so anti-Israel. And this is, again, 20 years ago, not new. And so we had to place the center at the Center for International Institute. Now, other area studies were also there, so it was a very legitimate place for our center to be. After October 7th, our center faced probably one of the most real threats against it, which was when SJP UCLA, as part of their encampment demands of the UCLA administration, one of them specifically was for them to ban the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies.
Wow.
And so we were named on their demands, and thankfully, very quickly, the chancellor, UCLA administration, everybody, not only, absolutely said there's no way we're going to do this, but came down very hard on the encampments, and that's when the police came in and removed them. But they specifically addressed the center and said that this is part of our discourse, that you're not able to target any area of study, and Israel is just like any other country. Why would you ever do that? So our center has been in the eye of the storm. I would say for most of its existence, we've had very little demonstrations against our center. We've had Israeli presidents, we've had all kinds of leaders, we've had all kinds of academics. We've never had issues. Today, I think on campus, like every campus, there's a little bit of reticence and concern about bringing Israelis from any area to campus. We have done that. We just brought Yossi Beilin, who is a former peace negotiator, and we'll continue to do that. We're not backing in any way. But having a serious center that is not an advocacy center, let's be very clear.
Yeah.
These centers are centers for academic and research analysis. And they have to come to the issues around contemporary Israel from a scholarly perspective. We're not there to say Israel's good or bad. We're there to explain, describe, and educate UCLA students about the complexities, about the nuances of Israel, and about the real Israel. We're not there to make Israel look good. We're not there to make Israel look bad. So that's very important. And I think these kind of centers are very important. And for those donors who are really upset with, universities who want to pull their funds, I've always told them, repurpose, don't pull away. Put them towards causes you believe in, and make sure that scholarship about Israel doesn't stop, because there are plenty of those who passively or actively are boycotting Israeli institutions, not inviting Israeli professors, not allowing graduate students to write their dissertations about Israel. I mean, the level of anti-Semitic behavior on university campuses goes deep, and we have a lot to kind of come back from. But I think a center that is devoted to the study of Israel is a very important part of the solution. And I'm very proud of our affiliation with UCLA. We have a new chancellor now, Chancellor Julio Frank, who is very strong on our issues, understands the threat to academia when Jewish faculty are leaving, when Jewish students are not being admitted. I mean, all the challenges that we continue to see, he gets it. So I'm really happy that I have a great partner now to continue the work of the center with.
Wonderful. It's incredible to hear. And I wish there was a center like that at every university.
It can be.
Important. And again, I mean, it's about whether you agree with it or not. It's about hearing perspectives. As we've learned what's happening in academia, it's become about telling you what to think instead of how to think. So it's important to have those spaces that can expand people's minds. One final question, and then I know you gotta go.
Okay, quickly, yes.
You have navigated complex identities and political landscapes. How do you reconcile differing perspectives within your own community regarding U.S. Leadership, and what advice do you give to an organization like Jimena to try and bring those people who are so polarized in their American political ideals together?
Believe me, this is a challenge for all of us. But here's where I go. I'm happy to share what I tell myself, my inner voice to myself, and hopefully maybe that helps to kind of some of your audience members. I hang on to my values, and I'm very clear about what is important to me, to my family, for my children, what kind of a role model I am to them. I have 3 adult children that they're the biggest pride of my life. So my behavior, my rhetoric, my language, and how I spend my time all day, I'm thinking of them. And I'm thinking, hopefully one day I'll have grandchildren and they can look back at their grandmother and say, okay, here's how she showed up at this moment. We are a moment of great complexity. And I think for us to hang on to not only our identity, but the values that come with that identity, things that we had been, given from past generations and brought us to this moment, we have to hang on to that. And I think, look, I'm an American educated Iranian. I have embraced the values of what a liberal democratic society looks like. I will not go back to being a Jew in Iran, where my life, my safety and security was in the hand of one man, the king. I will not do that. That is not good for my safety of me, my children, my grandchildren. So my values are about protecting my family, but also about being sophisticated enough and open enough to realize where I'm living, and that what is the institution and what are the frameworks in my new homeland here in America that afford me the protection I need that my forefathers didn't have in Iran. And that's why, our history was one of constant pogroms and anti-Semitism and fear. So this moment is a challenging moment for us. We have to keep our mind open, but we also have to be true to our values. And hopefully those values are not just motivated by fear, which can be manipulated so easily, but core values of what our Jewishness tells us, what our journey from Iran to have come here. Why did we come here? We could have stayed in Iran. There are plenty, there's some Jews still left in Iran. We could have gone to other non-democratic countries, but we chose to come here. And we've benefited from everything this country has given us. And so I think we have to go deep. We have to be nuanced. We have to be sophisticated in our analysis and where we put our allegiances, and not just be, swayed by just rhetoric that makes us feel good, but in reality is actually dangerous to us. So I think Jimena is very much aligned with that. I've seen the kind of writing you put out. I see the analysis. I see the perspectives, the diversity of perspectives you give. And I think staying open, but also not being controlled by our fears and the worst things that we imagine is kind of what rules my decision making anyway.
That's very sound advice. So thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nazarian. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. And thank you for everything that you and your foundation does. And until we meet again.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you to Jimena, to Sarah, the leadership of Jimena. I really value you all every single day. And anytime I can be of help, I'm happy to be. Thank you.
Thank you.